They laughed at me every single day, not because I was weak, not because I didn't try, but because I was the only black kid in the entire school. Every step in those hallways felt like walking into a spotlight of ridicule. They called me names, whispered jokes, made sure I never forgot I didn't belong. I kept my head down, but inside I burned. I never answered back. I never fought. Until the day came when they gave me the ball. That was the day everything changed, and they never laughed the same way again. I was never supposed to stand out. At least, that's what everyone made me believe. Being the only black kid in a school where everyone looked the same, talked the same, and treated me like an outsider. I carried the weight of 1,000 stares every single day. It wasn't just the laughter in the hallways or the cruel words whispered when they thought I couldn't hear. It was the silence too. The kind that told me without saying a word that I didn't belong. But what they didn't know is that pain can become fuel. Every insult, every shove, every time they rolled their eyes when I stepped onto the field, it all became a fire inside me. I learned something that day, something I want you to carry with you. When the world tells you that you don't belong, you have two choices. You can let it define you, or you can rise and redefine what's possible. This is not just my story. This is a story about every person who's ever been laughed at, doubted, pushed aside because of how they looked, where they came from, or what people thought they couldn't do. It's about turning ridicule into respect, silence into applause, and doubt into a legacy that can never be erased. And here's my promise to you. If you stay with me until the end, you will feel every ounce of that transformation. You will see how the boy they laughed at became the player they couldn't ignore, the teammate they had to respect, and the young man who turned humiliation into triumph. Before we begin, do me one favor, because this story isn't just mine, it's ours. Hit the like button if you believe in stories of resilience. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep discovering journeys where pain turns into power. And most importantly, drop a comment telling me which country and city you're watching from. I want to know where this story is reaching hearts around the world. Now let's step onto that field together, and let me show you how the boy who was always laughed at finally made them listen. The smell of sweat and leather always hit me the moment I pushed open the heavy locker room door. But it wasn't the stench that made me sick to my stomach. It was the silence that followed me inside. A silence sharper than any insult, colder than any winter wind. I was the only black kid on that team, in that school, and every day felt like walking into a place that had already decided who I was before I even said a word. I tried to act like it didn't bother me. I kept my head down, tied my laces, focused on the sound of my own breath. But out of the corner of my eye, I saw the smirks, the nudges, the way they leaned into each other and whispered. They didn't need to shout the words, "You don't belong here." Their silence was enough. Their laughter, muffled but deliberate, said it all. On the first day, I thought it was just me being paranoid. Maybe they just didn't know me yet. Maybe it would change. But then came the jokes. "Hey, you sure you can even hold the ball? Don't trip on those legs, track star. Hope you're not afraid of contact, kid." They threw those lines at me like candy, sweetened with fake smiles, but laced with venom. I laughed it off, at least on the outside. Inside, every word carved deeper. I wanted to scream, to push back, to prove them wrong right there in the locker room. But I knew better. I knew one wrong move, one outburst, and I'd be exactly who they wanted me to be, the angry black kid who didn't fit. So I swallowed it. Every single time. And yet, even in silence, I burned. Because the truth is, the locker room isn't just a place to change clothes. It's where teams are built, where bonds are made. For me, it was a battlefield before the game even began. That's when I realized I wasn't just another player fighting for a spot. I was fighting for the right to exist in their world. I thought the locker room was tough, but the field would prove to be even crueler. Practices were no different. When the coach split us into groups, I was always shoved to the back. When it came time to scrimmage, the ball almost never found its way into my hands. And if it did, there were snickers before the snap, bets whispered between teammates. How long before he drops it? Every mistake I made, even the ones everyone else made too, was magnified. A missed block, figures, a stumble in a drill, told you. No matter how much sweat I left on that field, no matter how hard I trained, I was never given the benefit of the doubt. But I stayed. I stayed because I knew walking away would give them exactly what they wanted. I stayed because deep down I believed there had to be a moment when all this would turn. I didn't know when, I didn't know how, but I knew I couldn't quit. And that belief, that stubborn refusal to quit, would be tested sooner than I imagined. Off the field, it wasn't much different. In the cafeteria, I sat alone. At parties, I wasn't invited. Walking across campus, I felt eyes on me like I was some kind of intruder. Professors treated me like an afterthought. Classmates barely learned my name. Every day was a reminder that this wasn't my home, that maybe it was never meant to be. But here's the thing, they didn't know my story. They didn't know where I came from, what I'd been through just to earn a spot in that college. They didn't know the nights I spent running until my lungs burned, the hours I spent lifting weights in a rusty garage, the sacrifices my family made to put me there. They didn't know, and they didn't care. So I carried it all with me. Every doubt, every insult, every silence. I carried it like extra weight on my shoulders, pressing me down, daring me to collapse. But I refused. If they wanted me broken, they would have to watch me bleed for it, and maybe that's what kept me going. The thought that one day, one game, one single play would flip the script. I didn't know it then, but the first chance to prove myself was already waiting just around the corner. Game days carried a kind of electricity that you could feel in your chest before you even stepped onto the field. The roar of the crowd, the clash of helmets, the marching band blasting their fight song. It was supposed to be every college athlete's dream. But for me, those days felt like a nightmare dressed in bright lights. Because while the rest of my teammates ran out to cheers, I sat on the bench, helmet in my hands, heart pounding for a chance that never came. The coach barely looked at me. He barked orders to everyone else, gave them nods of approval, even pats on the shoulder pads. But me? I was invisible. Sometimes I wondered if he even remembered I was there. When subs were called, I held my breath, hoping, just hoping that maybe this time he'd point at me. But the finger always went past me, to someone else, to anyone else. And the whispers never stopped. Teammates would lean in close and laugh under their breath. He's just here for diversity. Coach will never play him, not with that frame, or the one that cut deepest. He looks fast, but speed doesn't matter when you're too soft for the game. I told myself the bench was temporary, but the longer I sat there, the more it felt like a life sentence. Week after week, I stayed in that same spot. Sometimes I wondered why I even suited up. My family came to games, sitting in the stands, their eyes searching for me. And every time the whistle blew, I felt their hope fade a little more. I couldn't even look at them after. I didn't want them to see the disappointment written on my face. Still, I trained, harder than anyone else. While they went out after practice, I hit the weight room. While they laughed in the locker room, I studied plays until my notebook was filled with scribbles and diagrams. While they slept, I sprinted on the empty field under the stadium lights, each stride echoing against the silence. But none of that mattered when Saturday came. I sat, I waited, I watched. And yet, in a strange way, sitting on that bench became its own kind of fire. Every snap I watched from the sidelines made me hungrier. Every touchdown I didn't score carved deeper into me. Every minute that ticked by without my name being called was another reason to keep pushing, another reason to prove them wrong. I didn't know it then, but the bench was shaping me just as much as the field ever could. One afternoon during practice, we were running scrimmage drills. The offensive line shuffled into position, the quarterback barked signals, and as usual, I stood off to the side, helmet under my arm. Coach paced back and forth, his whistle swinging from his neck. Then, almost by accident, the ball landed in my hands. A fumble during the handoff rolled toward me, and instinct took over. I scooped it up and ran. The defense charged, arms reaching, helmets crashing. But before they could touch me, I exploded downfield. My legs burned, my lungs screamed, but no one caught me. 40 yards, 50, 60, end zone, touchdown. For the first time, the entire team stopped. Their eyes followed me, not with ridicule, but with something closer to disbelief. I expected cheers. I expected the coach to finally see what I could do. But instead, he blew the whistle, called the play dead, and barked for us to reset like it never happened. Just like that, my moment was erased. What I didn't realize was that moments like that would never stay buried forever. There's a sound that only football cleats make. The sharp clap against turf when you push off with everything you've got. It's a sound that makes your heart race if you're the one chasing. And one practice afternoon, I made the entire team hear it in a way they would never forget. It wasn't supposed to happen. I was standing off to the side again, helmet in my hands, sweat dripping down my neck. Coach was running first team reps and I was nothing but a shadow. Then a mistake, a botched play, a ball slipping loose. Instinct took over. I snatched it up and ran like my life depended on it. For a split second, the field went quiet. Then came the pounding of footsteps behind me, defenders exploding off the line, teammates shouting. But none of them could touch me. I cut left, I cut right, my legs pumping faster than they ever had in practice. 10 yards, 20, 30. The field stretched ahead like an open runway, and I was flying. By the time I hit the end zone, I realized I had just shown them something they couldn't unsee. I spiked the ball without even thinking, chest heaving, lungs on fire. The defense bent over, hands on their knees, gasping for air. A few of them shook their heads, muttering under their breath. They hadn't expected me to move like that. They hadn't expected me to outrun everyone in sight. For the first time, I felt the weight of their eyes. Not mocking, not dismissive, but stunned. One guy whispered, "Damn, he's fast." Another nudged his buddy, pointing at me like I was someone brand new. For a moment, it felt like the tide was turning. But then Coach blew his whistle. The shrill sound cut through the air, erasing everything. "Reset the play," he barked. No acknowledgement, no pat on the helmet, not even a nod in my direction. Just business as usual, like my run had never happened. I jogged back, heart still pounding, sweat dripping into my eyes. They wanted to pretend it didn't matter. They wanted to bury it. But I knew better. That glimpse of speed, it was real. And even if they denied it, I had seen it. They had seen it. And once people see what you're capable of, they can't ever truly unsee it. The rest of practice dragged on, but something was different. Teammates who had barely spoken to me before now glanced my way. Some nodded. Some smirked like they didn't know what to make of it. But beneath it all, I caught something in their eyes that hadn't been there before. Doubt. Doubt that maybe, just maybe, they had underestimated me. I carried that doubt with me like armor. If they wouldn't believe in me, I would make them question themselves every time I touched the field. That night I couldn't sleep. I replayed the run in my mind again and again, the feeling of the turf under my cleats, the sound of defenders gasping behind me. It wasn't just a practice play. It was proof that I wasn't invisible. Proof that I could outrun every insult, every stereotype, every limitation they tried to put on me. Still, I knew proof wasn't enough. Not yet. One run in practice wouldn't rewrite the story they had already written about me. If I wanted to change things, I'd need more. I'd need to keep showing them over and over until denial wasn't an option. So I doubled down. More laps, more weights, more sprints under the stadium lights when everyone else had gone home. I trained for the moment I knew was coming, the moment they'd have no choice but to hand me the ball in a real game. I didn't know when that moment would come, but I knew I had to be ready when it did. The stadium feels like a different world when it's empty. No cheers, no whistles, no pounding of helmets, just silence. The kind of silence that echoes in your chest. That's where I went when nobody else was watching. After the lights shut off in the weight room, after my teammates scattered to parties and dorm rooms, I laced up my cleats, grabbed a ball, and stepped onto that dark field like it was mine alone. The grass was damp with dew, the air cool against my skin. Each stride felt heavier at first, like the weight of every insult I carried clung to my legs. But then the rhythm took over. My feet slapped the turf, my lungs burned, and soon it was just me and the echo of my breath bouncing back from the bleachers. In that silence, I stopped hearing their laughter. I started hearing something else, my own heartbeat. I ran drills the way others crammed for exams. 10-yard sprints, then 20, then 50, until my chest heaved like it might explode. I set up cones in the dark and cut between them until my legs trembled. I carried weights across the field, shoulders screaming, arms shaking, refusing to quit. Nobody told me to do it. Nobody cared if I did. But I cared. Sometimes I imagined their faces, the smirks, the whispers, the eyes that refused to see me as more than a joke. I ran through them, past them, over them every night. They thought the bench would break me, but in the shadows, I was building something they couldn't see, something they wouldn't believe until it was too late. One night, as I collapsed onto the turf staring up at the black sky, I realized something important. Pain didn't scare me anymore. Pain was my companion, my teacher, my reminder that I was still alive and still fighting. And in that moment, I swore to myself that when the opportunity came, I wouldn't just be ready, I would be undeniable. But I didn't know someone was about to notice the nights I thought belonged only to me. The first time it happened, I was running suicides across the field, sweat dripping into my eyes, legs on fire. I heard a sound, footsteps. I turned and saw a figure at the edge of the bleachers. For a second, my stomach dropped. Was it a teammate, a coach? It was the janitor. He stood there quietly, mop still in his hand, just watching. At first, I felt embarrassed, like being caught with a secret. But then he nodded, just once, before walking away. That single nod lit something in me. Someone had seen. Someone knew. And even if it was just the janitor, it was proof I wasn't invisible. After that, I trained even harder. Not because I wanted his approval, but because I realized those silent nights weren't just practice. They were destiny rehearsals. I wasn't preparing for a game. I was preparing for the moment that would change everything. Sometimes the lights from the nearby street would flicker across the field, casting long shadows of me running with the ball. In those shadows, I didn't see the benchwarmer, the outsider, the kid they mocked. I saw the player I was becoming, stronger, faster, unstoppable. I clung to that image like a lifeline, because as much as the bench tried to convince me I was nothing, those nights reminded me I was something they couldn't measure with stats or stereotypes. And soon, fate would give me the stage I had been training for in the dark. Game day has a way of swallowing you whole. The roar of the crowd shakes your chest, the smell of popcorn and sweat mixes in the air, and the marching band makes every heartbeat sound like a war drum. I sat on the bench as usual, helmet balanced on my knees, pretending not to care that I wasn't part of the chaos. My job was to clap, nod, and stay invisible. The game was tight. Every snap echoed like thunder, every tackle rattled the ground beneath me. Our starting running back, big, broad, the golden boy, was carrying the load. Fans screamed his name every time he touched the ball. I sat there in silence, biting my tongue, waiting for a chance that never came. And then it happened. Midway through the second quarter, he broke through the line, lowered his shoulder into a defender, and the collision echoed like a gunshot. The crowd gasped. He stumbled, clutched his knee, and collapsed to the turf. For a moment, the entire stadium froze. Teammates rushed to him, coaches waved frantically, trainers sprinted across the field. And me? I sat there, heart pounding so loud I thought it would crack my chest open, because I knew what this meant. The golden boy was down, and suddenly, all eyes were turning toward me. Coach's face was red with panic. He barked orders, shuffled players, cursed under his breath. Then his gaze landed on me. For the first time all season, he couldn't avoid it. He pointed. "You're in." 2 words. That's all it took to flip my world upside down. My hands shook as I grabbed my helmet and snapped it on. The chin strap felt tighter than usual. My pads heavier, my legs like lead. I jogged onto the field, and the noise of the crowd swelled into a storm. But I wasn't hearing cheers. I was hearing doubt, the whispers I'd lived with for months. He's not ready. He's too soft. This'll be a disaster. The huddle broke. Quarterback barked the play. My palms were slick with sweat, but I nodded like I'd been waiting for this moment my whole life. In truth, I had. Every lonely sprint under the stadium lights, every silent drill, every ounce of pain. I had been building for this. The whistle blew. And in that instant, I realized I had only one choice: run or be erased. I lined up in the backfield, crouched low, eyes locked on the defense. They looked hungry, ready to feast on me. One of them sneered, mouthing words I couldn't hear but didn't need to. I knew exactly what he meant: you don't belong here. The quarterback called the snap. The ball hit my hands. For a split second, everything slowed down. The crowd, the noise, the fear. All I felt was the leather against my palms and the ground beneath my feet. Then instinct took over. I lowered my shoulders, pushed off, and exploded forward. The first defender lunged. I cut left and he whiffed. Another dove low. I hurtled over him, landing hard but never breaking stride. My legs churned like pistons, each step heavier but faster, louder, stronger. 10 yards, 15, 20. I could hear the stadium rising, voices blending into a single roar. I was no longer invisible. I was undeniable. And then, just as quickly as it began, the whistle blew. The play was over. I stood in the middle of the field, chest heaving, vision blurry with adrenaline. My teammates stared at me, some wide-eyed, some whispering, some shaking their heads like they couldn't believe what they'd just seen. But Coach didn't cheer. He didn't nod. He didn't even look at me. He simply called the next play, moving on as if nothing had happened. I thought my moment had already come and gone, but it was only the beginning. The ball in my hands didn't feel like leather anymore. It felt like fire. My fingers dug into the laces, and I swear I could feel my pulse racing through it. The first carry, my first real moment on the field. Months of ridicule, endless nights of silent training, every cruel word I had swallowed. It all funneled into that single second. The defense crouched across from me, eyes locked, hungry. I could see their grins through the face masks, the silent promise that they were about to bury me in the dirt. My knees shook. My lungs burned before the play even started. But deep inside, something else stirred, a fire that whispered, "This is it. Don't you dare waste it." The whistle blew, and in that instant, I knew there was no turning back. The quarterback barked the cadence, the snap came clean, and the ball was in my gut before I had time to think. My body moved on instinct. I lowered my shoulders, tightened my grip, and exploded forward. The first defender came fast, his arms outstretched. I juked right, his fingers grazing my jersey but catching nothing. Another barreled in low, helmet aimed at my knees. I leapt over him, hitting the turf hard but never slowing down. The world blurred around me. All I could hear was the pounding of my cleats and the roar of the crowd turning from laughter into something different, something louder. Every step felt like tearing away a chain they had locked around me. 10 yards, 15, 20. My legs burned, my chest screamed, but I refused to stop. I wasn't just running for yards. I was running for respect, for every insult, for every time they called me soft, for every stare that told me I didn't belong. By the time I went down, dragged by 3 defenders who needed all their strength just to slow me, I had pushed farther than anyone expected. I lay on the ground for a second, grass pressed against my face, heart hammering. Then I heard it. Silence. A heavy silence, the kind that falls when people don't know what to say. For the first time, they weren't laughing. They were staring. I got up, handed the ball back, and jogged to the huddle. My teammates' eyes followed me. Some looked shocked, some looked annoyed. A few nodded, almost against their will. The quarterback smirked, shaking his head like he couldn't believe it. Coach didn't say a word. He just called the next play. But the look on his face, tight lips, clenched jaw, told me everything. He was rattled. He had seen what I could do. and now he couldn't unsee it. The next snap came, and once again the ball found my hands. This time the defense came harder, angrier, like they had something to prove. But so did I. I cut through them like water slipping past rocks, twisting, pushing, refusing to go down easy. Every tackle they tried only made me stronger. By the end of that drive, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the one moving chains, dragging the team forward. And even though no one cheered my name, even though the coach kept his silence, I felt it. I felt the shift. Walking back to the sideline, helmet tilted high, I caught the eyes of the crowd. For months they had mocked me, shouted slurs, laughed when I warmed the bench. But now, I saw something else in their faces. Hesitation, curiosity, respect fighting its way through disbelief. They didn't know it yet, but this was only the first taste of what I was about to become. The first carry had cracked the silence, but silence doesn't last long in a stadium. It always turns into noise, and as I lined up for the next series, I heard it shift. Some voices were cheering, surprised by what they'd seen. Others weren't. From the sideline, I caught the words like bullets through the air. Fluke. He'll choke next time. Don't get too excited, it's just one run. They couldn't deny what I had done, but they couldn't bring themselves to believe it either. And behind those voices was the uglier noise, the one I had learned to recognize even before I set foot on this field. Slurs muttered under breath, taunts coated in venom. I swallowed it down and crouched into position. The ball snapped, and once again it was in my hands. And once again I ran, not just against defenders, but against every word that tried to chain me down. The line collapsed in front of me, helmets colliding like thunder. I cut through the chaos, shoulders low, knees high. A linebacker dove, but I spun off his grip, pushing forward. Another charged head-on. I lowered my pad level and blasted through him, feeling the shock rattle my bones. The field opened for a heartbeat, and I sprinted, legs burning, crowd roaring. By the time I hit the ground 20 yards downfield, I was shaking with adrenaline. Teammates helped me up this time. Not all of them, but enough to notice. A slap on the helmet. A muttered, "Nice run." Small things, but they mattered. Yet as I jogged back, I caught the eyes of some players on the sideline. Cold stares, tight lips, like they hated that I'd just proven them wrong. And in the stands, I could hear it, a mix of applause and curses, cheers tangled with contempt. It hit me then. I wasn't just running for yards. I was running through hate itself. Every step forward was against more than defenders. It was against history, prejudice, the weight of being the only one. And no matter how many yards I gained, I knew there were still battles I hadn't won. Drive after drive, they fed me the ball. Reluctantly at first, but each time I moved the chains, each time I refused to go down, the hesitation faded. I was becoming part of the offense. The crowd, too, began to shift. Chants started to rise, not just for the team, but for me. My name, shouted by voices that had mocked me only weeks before. But mixed in were others, people who refused to change, who doubled down on their hate the louder the cheers got. I could hear them, feel their words clawing at me from the bleachers. He'll slip up. He doesn't belong. Just wait, he'll fail. I wanted to turn and shout back, to scream at them that I wasn't going anywhere. But I didn't. I let my legs answer. Because every time I carried the ball, I silenced more of them. Not all, but enough. Back on the sideline, helmet tucked under my arm, I sat on the bench differently now. Not as an outcast, not invisible. My chest rose steady, my eyes locked on the field, and for the first time I felt like I belonged. Not because they said so, but because I had earned it. Still, I couldn't shake the truth. Applause can be loud, but hate whispers even louder. And I knew, no matter how far I ran, it would always chase me. But what none of them realized was that hate had only ever made me faster. By the third quarter, something had shifted. I could feel it in the way the quarterback looked at me, in the way the offensive line dug deeper when I lined up behind them. The crowd wasn't just watching anymore, they were waiting to see what I'd do next. Every snap felt heavier, not because of fear, but because of expectation. The ball snapped, and once again, It was mine. I burst through a gap, shoulders low, eyes scanning for daylight. 10 yards. 15. The defenders swarmed, but I twisted, shoved, pushed. The field stretched open, and for a heartbeat, I thought I might take it all the way. Then came the hit. It wasn't clean. It wasn't fair. A defender launched at me long after the whistle should have blown, helmet to my ribs. Pain exploded through my side, white-hot and blinding. I gasped, stumbling as my legs buckled beneath me, and the turf rushed up to meet my face. In that moment, I thought it was over, that the laughter would return louder than ever. I lay there, clutching my ribs, the stadium spinning above me. My breath came in short, ragged bursts, each one stabbing like a knife. Around me, helmets clashed, whistles blew, coaches shouted, but all I could hear were the voices in my head. The old ones. You don't belong here. You're too soft. You'll never last. But then through the haze of pain, another sound broke through. It started low, then grew louder, rolling like thunder across the bleachers. The crowd was on their feet, cheering, shouting my name, for me. The same people who once laughed were now roaring, fists in the air, voices colliding in a storm of support. For the first time, their noise wasn't a weapon. It was a shield. I pushed myself up, vision blurred, chest aching. Trainers tried to rush to me, but I waved them off. I wasn't leaving this field. Not now. Not when I had finally made them see me. The pain in my ribs was real, but the fire in my chest was stronger. Back in the huddle, my teammates looked at me differently. Not as the outsider. Not as the bench warmer. For once, they looked at me as someone they could count on. Some nodded. One lineman slapped my shoulder pads, muttering, "We got you, man." Small words, but they carried the weight of years. The next play, I lined up again, ribs screaming with every breath. The quarterback gave me a quick glance, his eyes asking if I was ready. I nodded, even though my body begged me to quit. The snap came, the ball hit my stomach, and I ran. Every step hurt. Every collision sent shockwaves through my side. But I kept moving. 5 yards. 10. I dragged defenders with me, refusing to fall. By the time the whistle blew, I had moved the chains again. The crowd erupted, not for the golden boy, not for the starters. For me. And in that roar, I realized something that changed everything. I wasn't running alone anymore. For the first time, they weren't against me. They were with me. What started as hate had turned into fuel, and that fuel was about to carry me farther than anyone expected. The scoreboard glared down at us like a judge about to deliver a sentence. Fourth quarter, 2 minutes left. We were down by less than a touchdown, and the ball was in our hands. The stadium buzzed with nervous energy, every fan on their feet, every voice trembling with hope or fear. I stood in the huddle, helmet tilted back, chest heaving. My ribs still ached from that dirty hit. My legs felt like cinder blocks, but my eyes burned with something stronger than pain. The quarterback looked around at us, his voice sharp, urgent. Then his eyes landed on me. "You ready?" he asked. I didn't nod. I didn't need to. My silence said it all, because in that moment everyone knew the ball was coming to me. We broke the huddle. I jogged to my spot in the backfield, the crowd's roar rising like a storm. Across the line, defenders crouched low, their eyes locked on me. They knew too. They wanted me broken, buried, erased. I could feel their hatred pulsing across the line of scrimmage. The snap came. The ball slammed into my gut, and I drove forward. The first defender hit me head on, but I spun off him, feet churning. Another dove for my ankles. I leapt, landing hard but never losing stride. The noise of the crowd blurred into a wall of sound, my vision narrowing to the green field stretching ahead. 10 yards, 15, whistle, first down. The clock ticked down. 90 seconds. Back in the huddle, the quarterback barked another play, but I barely heard him. My focus tunneled into the next snap, the next run, the next chance. The second play came. I cut inside, found daylight, and pushed through 2 tacklers, dragging them like anchors. The sideline erupted, Teammates pounding their helmets, fans screaming my name. For the first time, I felt the stadium behind me, not divided, not doubtful, but united. And yet the closer we got to the end zone, the heavier the weight became. 1 minute left, 20 yards to go. The coaches shouted from the sideline, voices hoarse. The crowd was a tidal wave now, every chant shaking the ground beneath my cleats. The defense stacked the line, daring us to break them. I crouched low, breath sharp, eyes locked on the end zone like it was the only thing that existed. The snap cracked through the air, the ball was mine again. I pushed forward, legs screaming, arms pumping. A defender grabbed my jersey, ripping me sideways, but I spun free. Another slammed into me, ribs screaming in protest, but I lowered my shoulder and plowed through. 10 yards, 15. The noise was deafening. I stumbled, almost went down, but the crowd's roar lifted me, carried me. I wasn't just running on muscle anymore. I was running on every insult I'd ever endured, every laugh I'd ever swallowed, every night I had spent alone on this field. I crossed the first down marker and collapsed to the turf, the ball cradled tight against my chest. Whistle, 40 seconds left. The stadium was trembling now. Back in the huddle, sweat dripping into my eyes, I could see it in my teammates' faces. Belief. Real belief. For the first time, they didn't just see me as the black kid on the team. They saw me as the one carrying them. The quarterback called the final play, voice shaking. Everyone knew it. Everyone felt it. And as I lined up for the last snap, I realized the entire game, maybe even my entire life, had led to this single moment. The ball felt heavier than ever when the quarterback pressed it into my gut. Last play, last chance, 20 yards to destiny. My legs trembled, my ribs screamed, but none of that mattered now. I locked my eyes on the end zone and told myself, this is mine. The defense crashed forward, hungry, desperate to stop me. Helmets collided, arms reached, voices roared, but I lowered my shoulder and drove. Every step was a war. One defender grabbed at my jersey, fabric tearing in his hands as I ripped free. Another slammed into my side, but I spun, stumbling forward. The crowd was on its feet, a single wave of sound crashing down. I heard my name, screamed by the same voices that once mocked me. And with the end zone in sight, I knew there was no going back. 10 yards left. My lungs burned, legs on fire, vision tunneling into the goal line. Another defender lunged low, arms wrapping around my knees. For a split second, I felt my body tipping, gravity pulling me down. But I refused. I planted my hand on the turf, pushed off, and surged forward, dragging him with me. The crowd erupted, the sideline exploded, my teammates screamed. 5 yards, 3, 1. Then, with every ounce of strength I had left, I dove. The world slowed. Air rushed past my face. The ball stretched forward in my hands. And then, impact. My body crashed into the end zone, ball breaking the plane. Whistle. Touchdown. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Total stunned silence. Then the stadium detonated in sound. Cheers so loud they rattled the bleachers, voices rising in disbelief and awe. I lay on the turf, chest heaving, ball still clutched to my chest. My teammates piled onto me, helmets slapping my back, voices screaming my name. Somewhere in the chaos, I heard the announcer, touchdown. The word echoed through the air like a verdict. And in that instant, I wasn't invisible anymore, I was unforgettable. I stood, sweat dripping, vision blurred by tears I refused to let fall. I looked up into the stands, faces I had memorized for their laughter, their sneers, their smirks. They weren't laughing anymore. Some stood frozen, mouths open. Others cheered with wild abandon, like they'd been with me all along. But I knew the truth. I knew who had doubted me, who had tried to bury me. And that made the moment sweeter. The scoreboard flashed victory. My name was on every lip. The stadium wasn't just watching me anymore. They were celebrating me. The same boy who once sat alone at lunch, ignored in the locker room, laughed off the field, had just carried an entire team, an entire school into glory. When I walked off the field, helmet in hand, the crowd still roared. Reporters crowded the sidelines. Students chanted. Strangers stretched out hands just to touch me. It was chaos, but it was mine. And deep down, beneath the noise, I felt something quieter. Justice. Not the kind handed down in words, but the kind you earn with sweat, blood, and a refusal to quit. That touchdown didn't just win a game. It rewrote who I was, and who I would always be. The game ended, but the noise followed me into the night. Long after the stadium lights dimmed, I could still hear the echo of the crowd in my chest. My phone buzzed nonstop. Messages from classmates who had never spoken to me before, from numbers I didn't even recognize. But it wasn't until Monday morning, when I walked through those hallways, that I realized everything had changed. The same halls where laughter used to stab at my back now felt different. There was no mocking, no whispered jokes, just silence. Heads turned as I passed. Some students smiled nervously. Others gave me small nods like we had been friends all along. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. For the first time, I wasn't a target. But respect has a weight of its own, and I was about to learn that. At my locker, a group of guys who used to mock me every chance they got stood waiting. My body tensed, ready for another round of insults. But instead, one of them said, "Hey man, good game." His voice cracked like he wasn't used to the words. Another patted my shoulder awkwardly before walking away. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't enough to erase the months of ridicule, but it was something. Teachers too looked at me differently. Professors who barely noticed me in class now called on me more, smiled when I answered. Even the coach, though he kept his distance, couldn't hide the shift in his eyes when he saw me at practice. The wall between us hadn't fallen, but cracks had appeared. And then there were the strangers. People I had never spoken to stopping me in the cafeteria to say, "That was incredible," or asking, "How did you do it?" It was surreal, almost disorienting. But in that whirlwind, I also saw something else. Some people still glared, still held on to their disdain, their prejudice. I could feel it in their eyes, sharp and bitter. Respect hadn't changed everyone. It had only exposed them. And I realized respect doesn't erase hate. It forces it to retreat into the shadows. Walking those hallways felt like carrying a crown and a cross at the same time. The crown was the recognition, the admiration, the nods of approval I had never known. The cross was the weight of expectation, of being the symbol they all now watched. Every step felt heavier, because I wasn't just walking as myself anymore. I was walking as the kid who proved them wrong. One afternoon, a teammate who had been one of my harshest critics stopped me by the gym. He hesitated, shifting uncomfortably before finally muttering, "You earned it, man." I stared at him, searching his face for sincerity. Maybe it was there. Maybe not. But I didn't need his validation anymore. Because here's what I learned. Respect given late doesn't heal old wounds. But it can be a sign. A sign that you've shifted the balance, that you've forced the world to see you differently. And sometimes that's enough. I no longer walked with my head down. I no longer tried to shrink into corners. I walked tall, my steps steady, my eyes meeting theirs. Not in arrogance, but in truth. They didn't need to say it out loud. I knew they would never look at me the same again. It's strange how quickly memories can shift. Not long ago, I walked through those halls as the kid everyone laughed at. Their jokes, their whispers, their cold stares. They followed me like shadows I couldn't escape. But now, when I close my eyes, the sound I hear isn't laughter anymore. It's the roar of the crowd, the thunder of thousands of voices chanting my name as I crossed that goal line. That touchdown didn't just win a game, it changed everything. Not only for me, but for everyone who had watched. Suddenly, I wasn't the only black kid in their school. I wasn't the punchline of their cruel jokes. I was the player who refused to quit. The runner who carried the ball and the weight of their doubt and turned both into something undeniable. And once you've changed how people see you, you can never go back. In the weeks that followed, something remarkable happened. Younger kids, freshmen, sophomores, kids who had never dared speak to me, started stopping me in the hall. Man, that was unbelievable. I want to run like you one day. Their eyes carried something I had never seen before. Hope. It wasn't just about football anymore. It was about proof. Proof that no matter how stacked the odds, no matter how loud the laughter, you can fight back, not with fists, but with perseverance. Letters started arriving. Notes slipped into my locker. Some from students I didn't know, others from kids who had mocked me before. Some admitted they had been wrong, others just said, "Thank you." A few shared their own battles, their own stories of being different, isolated, doubted. And for the first time I realized my fight wasn't mine alone. Because what started as survival had become legacy. And legacy doesn't live in trophies or headlines. It lives in the people you inspire. On game days now I hear the chants. On campus I see the nods. And yet, I carry with me the memory of what it was like before. The silence, the hate, the endless doubts. I keep it close because it reminds me that victory means more when it's born from pain. Sometimes, late at night, I still go back to that empty field. I run under the floodlights alone, the same way I did before anyone believed in me. Only now I'm not running to escape their laughter. I'm running to honor what it took to silence it. And when I look back on it all, I see the lesson clearer than ever. You can't control what people say about you, but you can control how you answer. And sometimes the best answer isn't words, it's action. I was once the boy they mocked every day, the outsider, the invisible one. But I carried the ball, and with it I carried something greater, courage. And from that moment on, the laughter they once threw at me became the legacy I left behind. They laughed at me every single day. They said I didn't belong. They tried to bury me under their hate. But when the moment came, I didn't just carry the ball, I carried every insult, every doubt, every scar, and I turned it into victory. Because sometimes, the sweetest sound in the world is the silence of those who once laughed at you. If this story moved you, hit like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from.